I'm sure some of you have noticed that I have not been making videos over the last couple of months. I have had a number of different projects that have come up that I've been working on over the summer. So that has taken up the majority of my free time. Now that summer is coming to a close, I finally have some extra time to put back into the podcast. And in coming back, I thought it would be good to reflect on a couple of the most significant stories that have taken place and unfolded over the last few months. And I think the first one we have to start with is obviously the Trump assassination attempt. And it is a very weird thing to think about, to think that I was alive when all of these things were happening, because we know that things like this, similar things have happened throughout American history. The assassination attempt of, or the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, the assassination of JFK, and in similar other circumstances, other similar things happening throughout history. But even though we accept those things as accurate historical fact, it still seems kind of like it happened in a different reality. It happened in a different dimension or something like that. Because I can't imagine what it would be like being alive back in the 1800s when Abraham Lincoln was alive, or when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, or same thing when JFK was assassinated. It almost seems like it took place in a completely different, on a completely different planet, even though we accept it as American history. And so now, coming out on the other side of it, it's very weird to think about that I was alive. I was there. I was following these stories when somebody tried to kill a presidential candidate. And thankfully, Trump is okay. Thankfully, Trump survived and the campaign continues. I took a few moments just to think about what it would mean for our country, what it would mean for our government, what it would mean for our democracy if a significant political candidate was killed. Whether it be Trump or RFK or Biden or Harris, it would be a very, very dark time for America. And the fact that it happened is a very dark thing. But if somebody would have succeeded in that act, it would leave us in a very dark place. And thankfully, we were able to avoid the worst case scenario. We were able to avoid that individual succeeding in assassinating Trump and avoiding that dark time in American history. So thankful for that. Thankful that Trump is okay. Thankful that everyone's okay. But I did want to talk about as well, not only the assassination attempt, but kind of the narrative, the driving narrative behind it. And I lay the blame of the assassination attempt at the feet of the shooter. The shooter, as far as we know, after a couple months of investigation, acted alone. This was an individual that seems to be unhinged in a way, and he he chose to do that. He chose to basically end his life in trying to kill Trump. And thankfully, there were counter snipers. I believe it was a counter sniper that took out this person. But again, you kind of have to talk about the narrative. And so, what we have heard for many years now, ever since Trump got involved in politics, really, is that he is an existential threat to democracy. He is Hitler. He is a dictator. He is all of these different things. And this has been said. There are people out there that actually believe it, and there are people that kind of say it in an attempt to create this hyperbolic narrative. And the problem is that whether or not they actually mean it, there are people out there. You have to know and understand that there are people out there that are taking this 100% literal. Like, they take it literally. If you have all of these different prominent people in these media outlets saying that Trump is a dictator, and you're comparing him, as you're putting him on the same level as all of these historically evil individuals, then you have to think that there are people out there that are taking them seriously. Maybe they're already on the extreme end, maybe they're far to the left, maybe they're far to the right, maybe they have significant mental illness. But I think the narrative is kind of what culminated in the mind of this individual and compounded in the mind of this individual to the point where he thought it was necessary to try and kill Trump. And I remember I was listening to, because when you create this narrative, it sets the table for an anything goes kind of mentality, in that revenge is good, retaliation is good, do whatever it takes to keep Trump. If Trump is truly as bad as all of these other horrible individuals throughout history, then we must do whatever it takes to keep him out of office. And I remember I was listening to a conversation between Dennis Prager and David Pakman. And one of the first questions that Pakman asked Prager was, do you think that the 2020 election was rigged or stolen? And I'm going to be paraphrasing here because it's been a while since I watched the video. But Prager's response was kind of interesting in that he said, when you look at the narrative and all of the things that we have heard, Trump is Hitler, Trump is a dictator, Trump is bad, Trump is evil, he's a threat to democracy. Do you not set the table for the election being stolen? Because if you could go back to 1920s or 1930s Germany and undermine the political underpinnings of their government to the point where you are able to keep Hitler out of office and maybe by extension stop World War II, would you not do that? And that was kind of the question that was posed. It's like, would you not do that? Would you not go back in time and take a shot at Hitler? Would you not go back in time and take a shot at Stalin or Lenin or whoever? And I think he made an interesting point where at this point, people now believe, unhinged people now believe, that there are things that Trump is guilty of that puts him on par with those historically evil individuals. And we know that, well, we would certainly go back and stop them. We would certainly go back and do whatever it takes to get rid of them. So that means that we must do whatever it takes to get rid of Trump. And again, I think that that narrative is kind of the driving force behind the assassination attempt of Trump. I'm not laying it at the feet of any like given media source or any specific speaker, but you have to realize that these narratives play a part in the way that people look at people, the way that we think about people. And so for somebody who might have a mental illness, somebody who might be slightly unhinged, um, they take it literally. And I think that the Trump, uh, the guy who tried to shoot Trump, I think he took it literally and he ran with it to the 10th degree. But again, thankfully everything is moving forward. Thankfully Trump is okay. Thankfully his family is okay, and that the political candidates are okay. And hopefully we can move forward with this election season with some, just normal debates and normal happenings and things just going about like they should. So hopefully, you know, praying for the safety of everybody, praying for the safety of our country. The second thing I wanted to talk about is the France Olympics, specifically the opening ceremony. And people have made a big deal about this. People have gone as far as to boycott the Olympics over this. And I just wanted to share a couple thoughts about it. The first thing being is, why would the French government allow that kind of creative decision to be made? Because it's been decades since France has hosted the Olympics, and it's been like 100 years since they hosted the Summer Olympics. And it's supposed to be a great honor when you have the opportunity to host the opening ceremony and your country is hosting the Olympics, because it gives you an opportunity. First of all, it brings in a ton of money for the country, and it brings in a lot of just economic support for the country because you have people from all over the world that are there, and you have all of these different events that are going on that are bringing people in. And so it's a huge honor. And you're supposed to take that time, particularly in the opening ceremony, to demonstrate, hey, here's what's special about us. Here's some of our history. Here's some of our culture. We're going to share it with the rest of the world on the biggest stage. But why would they make a mockery of the Last Supper? Why would they put that into the opening ceremony in the first place? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. Do they have nothing else that they can show us? Is there nothing else interesting about French history that we should know about or they would like to share with us, or do they have nothing else to offer? It's just very very odd that that is the path that they would take. And the second part of it is the whole boycotting thing. Now, I know a lot of people out there, their first instinct was, hey, we're going to boycott this, right? We're going to hurt the French government and we're going to hurt the viewership. And so we're not going to watch the Olympics at all. And I did not sit down and watch hardly any of the Olympics, not necessarily because I was boycotting it, but just because, as I mentioned earlier, I had a lot of things going on over the summer. So I didn't really take the time to sit down and watch. I was following the US men's basketball team because I wanted them to win really bad, mostly for the sake of Steph Curry because I wanted him to get a gold medal. And so I was kind of following it, but I didn't sit down and watch a whole lot of different events. And if you wanted to boycott the Olympics, that's fine. You have that choice. Do whatever you want, you know. But to me, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to say that you're boycotting the Olympics because the whole point of the Olympics, at least from my perspective, is that you have a group of amazing athletes who have trained their entire life for this, and they are representing your country. And if you're a competitive person like I am, you want your country to demolish everybody else. We want them to destroy, we want them to have more gold medals and just dominate everything. So, why would I pull my support for my own country because of what another country did? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Like a lot of countries, like there are a lot of countries that do a lot of things that we don't agree with, and we still don't pull our support from the Olympics then. I mean, I'm not comparing, I don't want people to take this out of context, but, and I'm not comparing the French government to the Chinese Communist Party, but it would be like saying that I don't like China and I don't like what the Chinese government does, so I'm not watching the Olympics. It's like, no, that's not the right attitude to have because the whole point of us going to the Olympics is so we can beat China, right? We want China to lose. We want the USA to beat China. So why would I pull my support for my own country because of what France did? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think that I am not a huge fan of boycotting in general. Not saying that I never have, but I just generally am not a big fan because I think that boycotting is kind of like it's the conservative version of cancel culture. And the problem with cancel culture is that it's never ending because the bar is always moving, right? The bar is always going up, down, and all around. The goalpost moves all the time. So you could be a good standing, upstanding, left-wing individual, a liberal individual now, but they move the goalpost so often that you could easily find yourself in a situation where, oh, now you're canceled. And I think conservatives have tried to come up with a remedy of their own for that or something to rival that. And so they just say, well, we're just going to boycott them. It's like, okay, like you can if you want to, but if you sit down and you try and write out all of the places, all of the people, all of the organizations and businesses that you need to boycott, you're going to be sitting there and writing a very, very, very long list. And to me, it's just not worth my time a lot of times. Not saying I'm not saying I've never boycotted anyone or I never would boycott anybody, but just generally as a concept, I think it's kind of a waste of time to go around and say, I'm boycotting this and I'm boycotting that, as if we're trying to get revenge or you're trying to get revenge on the left. Um, Yeah, there to me, there's no reason to pull your support for your own country based upon what another country did. If anything, you should say, well, the French government made a very stupid decision and they should be embarrassed. And so we're going to annihilate them. We're going to like destroy them in the Olympic Games, right? We're going to dominate their country. We're going to dominate all their athletes. That should be the mentality. Like from me as a competitive person, that's kind of the way that I would look at it. The third part of this is the LGBTQ community. And people, and you'll know, you probably, if you watched my videos, you know how I already feel about this, in that nothing is off limits. Absolutely nothing. It's kind of like that joke. One of my favorite jokes in Family Guy is when it's Quagmire's dad. He's sitting there at the bar doing something suspicious, and the bartender's like, "Hey, this is a public place. You can't do that." And Quagmire's dad's like, "Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm transgender." And the bartender's just like, "Oh, do whatever you want all the time." That's kind of how it is. Just nothing is off limits, man. It's just ridiculous. And it's very weird because there seems to be a lot of hypersensitivity towards any criticism of the LGBTQ whatsoever. And so it doesn't it's odd that there's a lot of hypersensitivity towards the criticism of the LGBTQ community, but then they turn around and criticize and mock everybody else's value system, particularly if it doesn't line up with their own. So that's interesting to me. It's kind of like, don't dish it out if you can't take it. We've all heard that expression. And so overall, just a massive L. Like, really, this is what you're going to be remembered for. You have the opportunity to have the Olympics in your country, and this is what stands out. Pathetic. That's pretty much all I had in terms of the politics. Did want to talk about a vacation that we got to take here just a couple weeks ago. We got to go to Colorado, and that's the furthest west that I had ever been in my life. I've been to St. Louis a couple times, been to Missouri a couple times, but never really went any further than that. And my wife, she wanted to fly. I kind of convinced her to drive, and I'm glad that we did. She said that she enjoyed it. People, just from what I gathered, people were kind of downplaying the drive because you got to drive through Kansas, you got to drive through. We actually went out of the way on the way up there to go to Mount Rushmore, so we ended up driving through South Dakota. Um, I thought it was a beautiful drive. It was kind of a pain, and it's kind of mind numbing, and we had to stop a couple times to rest. But I enjoyed it for the most part, and I'm glad that we drove because it's just beautiful. It's we live in a beautiful country, and I'm very grateful for that. To see all of those things that I've never seen before, just the rolling. I mean, you can see hills and stuff in Tennessee, but it's just different. It's just different where you can look out for miles and miles. And I have a lot of gratitude and just a lot of good memories from the scenery that we were able to witness there. And I also thought it was kind of cool, and this is something that you don't realize living like in town. You live here in the Midwest, and especially if you live in a city, or actually in a town, not necessarily out in the country, but in a town, because you just have everything right here, right? I can drive 5 minutes and hit, four different gas stations, or I can walk to a Kroger and get whatever I need. And so you don't really realize how much everything is spaced out. But I thought it was amazing that we didn't hardly go like 100 miles without seeing a gas station. That we have the infrastructure in our country where you can basically go wherever you want and not have to worry about gasoline. That's a tiny thing, might sound goofy to a lot of people, but that's like a huge benefit, and that's something that we definitely take for granted. Just the access of resources. Because you get out there and you're wondering, like, I don't have any service, I don't know where I'm going. Am I going to be able to find a gas station? There's like a gas station every 100 miles. Like, you're not going to go 100 miles without finding a gas station. So that's kind of cool that to me at least, that our country's set up that way, that can sustain that, and we can basically go wherever we want as long as we have the money to pay for the gas, because the gas is always available. And so we went to Mount Rushmore. Then we drove down to Colorado and we stayed right on the edge of Estes Park, Colorado. So it's kind of like imagine Gatlinburg, Tennessee, except smaller. And then the biggest attraction is of course the state park, which was really cool. And we had a cabin. We had a cabin that was about just a few miles from the entrance of the park, and did some shopping. Went out to eat a lot. Did some hiking, and it's just beautiful. There was kind of a little mountain behind our cabin, and I just walked up there, sat on a rock, and watched the sunset. And it's just different when there's mountains all around you and rock formations, and it's just really really beautiful. And a funny story, I, I have a I have a huge fear of there are a handful of things I actually sit around and think about, like, oh man, I'm afraid of this. This would totally suck. One of those fears is getting lost in a state park. Like the other fear is I hate spiders, and then I don't like the idea of being trapped out in the ocean. I will probably never go deep sea diving. I will probably never go deep sea fishing. It is just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I'm not, you're just sitting out there, you fall out of the boat, you're sitting out there in the middle of the ocean, you have nothing to help you. You are just a sitting duck for whatever kind of creature is wanting to have you for dinners. I just don't, not interested in that. I also hate the idea of getting lost in a state park. That is one of those, like, my top fear, because I've watched these documentaries. I like true crime documentaries, so I've watched these documentaries where it's like they take a map of the United States and they put a little pin in the map for every disappearance that happens. So naturally, you're going to have different places have higher concentrations of disappearances. So maybe like New York, where you have a ton of people, is going to have more disappearances than some small town in the Midwest, like where I live. Um, but there are some areas that have an extremely high concentration, and they kind of follow a path over the map. Well, then they would take the secondary map of the cave system and the national park system of the United States, and they would overlay that on top of the disappearance map. And the highest concentration of disappearances in the United States, it follows the cave and park system of the United States, like exactly. Like you have a mountain range, it just the disappearances just wiggle on up through the mountains, man. And I'm like, not interested in that. Well, we go up, there's this very famous lake called Bear Lake, and it's very beautiful. It's very quiet and peaceful, and we walk around it. It's like a mile around it, and then you have this option of going up this secondary trail, and the trail is like 2.5 miles, and it's one direction, meaning that the same way you go up is the same way you have to come down. And there are 3 different lakes as you go up the mountain. So you have one here, you walk like a mile, and you have another one, you walk like a mile, and you have another one. So it's really cool. So there's different sets of lakes that just kind of fall down the mountain. And so we decided to walk up that one. And we get about a half a mile from the top, and it's starting to get dark. And I was like, okay, we're starting to get tired, starting to get dark. And I was like, we're just going to finish this out because it's supposed to rain tomorrow and we might not get another chance, because this was our day. This is the day we're going to do all of our hiking. And so we press on, we go on up the mountain, and we finally get there. And it was just beautiful. It was kind of like this canyon kind of that met down into a lake. And there was actually a waterfall coming down from the rocks of the canyon. And it was just really beautiful. We were the only 2 people up there at the time. And so we took a couple pictures, and then we started to go back down. And it's just getting darker and darker, especially because we were in wooded areas. And so the trees are hiding some of the sunlight, and we're trying to hustle. Okay. Well, we get to this point where it was basically kind of like a swamp from where the lake was. And they had built a man-made deck over this swampy area. And there were these 2 elk that were eating right beside the path. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to get trampled. So we're just going to sit here on top of this rock, and we're going to wait until the elk move. Well, they don't move. We're sitting there for 10 minutes and they do not move. And another group walks by them going up. There were still people going up. I was getting as we were going down, and it was getting dark. And by the time we decide to just move on, it was almost pitch black. You could just see the silhouette of the elk there. And so we ended up walking down, and we were 10 feet away from this wild animal, and we were kind of just like sidestepping in the opposite direction away from them. So we got past them, and we walked in the pitch black for probably about 45 minutes. And we had first aid, we had backpack, we had water, we had some snacks, we had flashlights on our phone. I was very uncomfortable. Did not I'm glad that I did it. Like, I don't regret going through with the hike, but that was a very uncomfortable 45 minutes for me because we were seeing people. There are people out there videotaping the lake at night. There are people moving up the hills. We were going down the hill. It was pitch black. And so I started to think to myself, I was like, well, maybe we're just being a couple of cowards. Maybe we're just being chicken. Maybe this is pretty normal. Maybe, people do this all the time. What's the big worry? What's the big problem? But the longer we walked in the dark, I was like, no, those people are completely insane. No service, out in the middle of nowhere. We were 2.5 miles from our vehicle, miles and miles away from civilization. And I was sitting there, I'm like, I'm about to become a statistic, and I'm not enjoying this. But it was fun. Just a goofy story. Uh, we had a lot of fun. It's very beautiful. Don't regret it. And that's kind of what I've been doing, other than the projects that I've been working on over the summer. We just got back from that trip about a week and a half ago. So thankful that we were able to do that. Thankful that we were able to see all of those things. We went to Mount Rushmore, but then they also, so you have famously the four presidents, the face of the four presidents carved into the side of the mountain there. But they also had a crazy horse who was a very famous Native American figure. They were carving his image into the face of another mountain. It's like him on top of a horse. It's really cool. They've been working on it for a very long time. And there's a Native American museum just below the mountain there. So we went to that as well. That was really cool. That was something that we didn't really have on our radar until we were down there. And we're like, well, we might as well go give that a shot as well. So highly recommend, highly recommend as something different. If I know a lot of people they like to go to Tennessee, they like to go to the beach. But if you're looking for something different, I would really recommend going to Colorado because it was very cool and a very enjoyable experience. So good to be back home. Glad that things have settled down a little bit. And I'm looking forward to creating more videos for you guys.